Hey everyone, Mr. Silbaugh here, and this is my lesson on lesson writing, talking about assessments. Now, in the past few lessons, we talked about all of the different parts of writing a lesson. This part talks about the actual assessment piece of it. All right, so the first thing we're going to ask is what exactly are assessments? Because with you probably think of assessments as tests, and that's just a part of it. Whenever you've taught a lesson, you need to assess how your students did. And in order to do that, you typically use an assessment. And it's a tool to measure the progress. It could be a test, it could be a project, it could be something even more than that. There's a few different types of assessments, and we're going to talk about a few of them and then go into a little bit more detail about them. All right, so let's talk about the types of assessments. First, we have what's known as the pre-assessment or the pre-diagnostic. You may have heard of it before as a pretest, and that's exactly what it is. This is used to see what your students know about the topic before you actually start teaching about it. It can be a short test, but other methods will work here. And then after the pre-assessment, you'd use the data to construct your assessment or to construct your instruction and see what you actually need to teach, okay? Next is the formative assessment. This is used for quick feedback, and it's used after a lesson, and it's typically done at the end. You'd be able to see quickly who is and who isn't getting what you taught, and that's the whole goal. It's for quick, immediate feedback. Exit tickets, short quizzes, worksheets, etc. These are all examples of a formative assessment. Summative assessments are a measurement of what students learned at the end of instruction. This is a long-term measurement from start to finish of the unit. Usually always comes at the end of the unit to measure what students got out of it. And this could be unit tests, projects, presentation, and more. Honestly, the way that I remember the difference between summative and formative is the fact that summative has sum, S-U-M, which is the total, and that would make more sense here because summatives are the final and end result. All right, let's talk methods of assessment. All right, let's talk about something you're familiar with, tests, okay? Tests are going to measure progress and understanding, and in general, the longer the test, the more reliable the results are, like the more students are able to show what they know, plus the more questions you have, the more you can actually measure how much they actually retained and what they're, need additional help on. However, tests can be rather overwhelming if they're rather long, okay? It's about finding that balance between what is the right amount of questions to ask and what is the wrong amount of questions to ask. Ask too little and you end up not getting enough information. Ask too much and your data may be inaccurate because kids start getting tired after so long. There's quite a few different types of test questions. You've all interacted with all of them, and we're going to talk about them really briefly. All right, first is multiple choice. In this one, the student selects the best answer, or sometimes more than one answer, out of 2 to 4 or more different choices. Multiple choice questions are good for fact recall and applying learning. They can really help get a quick understanding because they're easy to grade and easy to interpret. So if you do use a multiple choice question, here's some pointers and best practices. Always state the stem as a direct question. What that's saying is whenever you ask the question, state it as a question. Don't be like, let's say Florida is, and then you have your choices. It leaves it very open to interpretation, and you can really confuse your students. Make it concise. Less words and verbs, the better. Don't tell a whole story in your multiple choice question. You want to make sure that you're getting directly to the question and what's being answered. If you put in unnecessary information, that leaves your question open to interpretation and can confuse your students. Avoid repeating parts of the question in the answer. What this means is, let's say you have your question and then your answer choices, and on your answer choices you have the same starting part to it. Just put that starting part into the question. It'll make it so much easier. Next, point out any negatives, like if you're going to say not, which of the following is not one of the so on and so forth. You want to make sure you point that out, okay? Underline it, highlight it, make it bold, whatever you need to, because that's going to draw more attention to it. And make all of your answers plausible, meaning make them all possible, okay? One of the things and one of the best advice that I ever got in designing test questions was when you make a multiple choice test, you have your 4 answer choices. Make one of them completely false, okay? Then make one of them completely off the wall. And then make 2, one the answer, and one that's very close or similar to the answer. And here's the reason why. The one that is just a random answer will sometimes throw people off, okay? And they may think that that's the correct answer because it's, the odd one out. The off the wall one may attract people because of the fact it's so off the wall that it might possibly be right. And then the last 2 are obvious. The one that is completely correct is the one that you're trying to, you want them to get the answer, but at the same time, you don't want them to get the answer because you want to make it tricky, okay? That's a true understanding and true measure of their knowledge. The one that is close to the answer is the trap. It's trying to trap them into picking that one. So that's how I've learned to do my multiple choice tests. However, that's not always the case, and you need to make sure you adapt it for your age range. All right, next is true false. This is my least favorite one. True false is a statement in which the student must pick out if it's true or false. Okay, some guidelines for this. Make sure they're absolutely true or absolutely false. You don't want anything in the middle or anything potentially in between because that leaves it open to interpretation and your students will get confused. Next, you want to make it a clear and simple statement. Come right out and say what you're saying. Don't give some long detailed story because you start losing your focus. Only include one idea in a test item. Like, don't do like comparing 2 different things. You want to make sure you stay true to what you're being asked. It should be based on facts and not random uncommon knowledge. If the person who's taking this, let's say, you're doing a question about science and you talk about music, and it's something that related to music that they need to know in order to answer it, no. You're testing them on the science concept, not the music concept. You want to make sure you avoid copying things from the text or the lesson. That makes it very easiest. You want to mix it up. And you also want to avoid negative statements because when you do a negative statement, I know that's usually the go-to one, you can really confuse them because sometimes you can interpret the negative statement wrong. Matching. Matching, you're typically putting a list of words or columns on the left to an answer on the right, and it's usually done by letters. You match the letter to the number. When you do this, make sure you state your directions clearly. You want to make sure it's not open to any interpretation. You say match. You want to make sure you say what you want them to do. Make sure you use items that are the same. You don't want to combine multiple topics. Like you might do theorists on the one side and what they proposed on the other side. Okay, don't just do like crazy mixtures of things. Use items that are the same, as I just said. Avoid any grammar issues, like anything that would give it away. And the stem of the question should be set to the question, okay? So it should be able to match rather easily. Completion and fill in the blank. Students complete a statement using a word or group of words. Only delete words that are significant. If you give the vocabulary word away and put some random word, that defeats the whole purpose. Don't remove so many words that the meaning is lost, meaning don't delete so many words out of it that you're guessing what they're trying to say, because you can leave it up to so many different interpretations. You want to make sure you avoid any obvious clues, like setting them up. Like if it's a 3-word phrase and you delete only 1 word, make sure there's only 1 response and not open to any interpretation. Make sure you avoid any grammar issues. One of the best pieces of advice too is make sure you put the blank at the beginning of the statement if it's possible. That leaves it open for them to pick exactly the word that you're looking for. Okay, in this one, you'd use it more for vocabulary. The other thing that I've learned too over the years is don't do the number of blanks unless you really want them to, unless you plan on doing it like that. Like if it's a two-word answer and you give them two blanks, it depends. For older students, you want to try and avoid that, but for younger students, you can definitely do that. And also, not talked about in here, but something that's important for younger students, you may include a word bank, and that's sometimes fine. But as they get older, you should expect them to know the vocabulary words in order to fill in the blank. Essays. Now, I said true and false were my least favorite, but essays are okay because essay you have a chance and an opportunity to kind of, talk your way out of the situation. In an essay, the student responds to a prompt and must write about the prompt. You want to make it so that the question being asked is clear. You want to give very clear directions. Don't just be like, talk about this, because they can go on for, a long time. You want a specific and clear direction in your essay. You want to make sure you limit the number of items. One, you want to make sure you limit the number of items because of the fact that you don't want them to run out of time. And two, you also got to read all of these. So the less you have, the easier it is on your life. Okay. You want to avoid optional essays. This one was an interesting one that I found out. And I always thought this was so cool when I was a kid, is that a teacher would give you 5 essays and you'd have to pick 3 out of the 5. That's actually bad because of the fact that in doing so, the 2 that you don't pick are probably the 2 that you're weakest on in subject knowledge. How do you show mastery then in that subject area? So it's not really a good idea to do that. Instead, you should do 2 or 3 essays, and they have to answer all 3. Okay. And then lastly, you need to choose how you score them. You should have a rubric or some way of scoring them because of the fact that you want to make sure you score them fairly and accurately, because it's not fun to read essays and have one student do one thing and another student do another thing, and you grade one student better, and it just gets to be a whole mess. So whenever you do this, you want to make sure you score them fairly and accurately, and a rubric is the best way to do this. Me personally, whenever I have to read essays, I grade them all at once. As much as it pains me sometimes because I have to sit there and read and read and read and read, I do read them all at once, maybe take a short break, and then get up and, come back to it within a matter of minutes. You always want to make sure you read them at the same time, because if you read them at the same time, it's still fresh in your mind and you know what you're looking for. All right, another method is projects. In a project, students are given a task to complete either individually or as a group, teacher's choice, and the project will need to show and measure mastery, okay? It's not just enough to give them a random project, it actually has to be tied to the standards, what you've taught, everything along those lines. And how are you gonna grade this projects? Equally and fairly, because sometimes, especially as I've learned over the years, you have to have a rubric in mind, okay? You also want to know how the students are going to be graded. You want to set them up for success and know exactly how they're going to be graded on this project. Make sure you're clear in your directions and expectations. You don't want to leave anything open to interpretation. Those of you who've seen my work know that I am extremely detailed whenever I give projects, and I know what I'm looking for. Next is performance-based assessments. In these situations, I kind of like these, but they're sometimes hard to grade. In these situations, students are asked to do a task or respond to a situation. They may be given like a situation and they have to explain how they would do it. It's usually a verbal exercise where they tell exactly how they're going to do it, or it's an acting exercise where they're going to, act it out. Or, I didn't even put it on here, but it could be included. It could be a written exercise where they write their answer and how they would respond. This is nice because it can show how students would react in a certain situation, and it's a good understanding if they understand the concept at hand. The only thing here, though, is you have to be careful because you have to tie it to the standards and tie it to what you're having them master. Portfolio. This is a collection of artifacts from a student. It's usually a collection of the best work from a student, and it's usually all tied together. It's usually more used for promotion practices, but it can also be used to demonstrate mastery of a certain topic or certain set of standards. You also would really like to have a rubric here to measure how well they've met each of those standards. And, well, there's a lot more different types of assessments. I've only included a few that I thought were the most important and some of the most beneficial. You don't need to know all of them, and you can research more of them on your own if you'd like. But why do we do assessments? And this is where we're going to end. On a personal level, we do assessments because we want to see how our students are doing. That's the main goal. At the end of the day, we want to see who knows what I'm talking about, who doesn't, and how am I going to fix that. On a school level, we want to see how our students are doing overall. Okay, are they on grade level? Are they ready for the next grade in a few years? What have you. On a district or network level, because some schools are in districts, and in our case, we're in a network, we do it to see how students are doing across schools and to compare. Is one teacher doing something better than another? Like, why is this student's data a certain way as opposed to this student's data? And it's important we keep track of that. You can also use the data and information to see who's struggling, who may have a learning disorder, and anything along those lines. Data and assessments can be very telling of our students and what they've actually learned, and can tell us about the students themselves. But lastly, and this is one of the more controversial issues, is we do it on a state and a national level because it could be required. You know, even though this year we don't have the FSAs, that's a requirement that we do it. It's a requirement that students take the FSA at the end of the year for promotion practices, and it's also to show what what they've learned. Okay, can you actually show that you are on grade level 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader, or what have you? And of course, it is controversial because we expect a test to measure that, whereas, as you've seen, some assessments are better for measuring things in other ways. Okay, and it's up to you. You form your own opinions about what you want and think is best. And now, as you get older and you move on in life, you'll start having different ways of assessments, like doing things in different ways. Okay, so it's important that you research your options and research your choices. All right, that's going to do it for this.